Hey there, everybody. It looks like we are live today. Welcome back. I am hoping that we are not going to be plagued by some of the technical issues we've had before. So we're going to try to dig right into it. Today we're working on this. We have this photo. You'll find it in the description. So if you're new to this series, we come here every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, drawing together. You'll find reference photos in the description. You'll be able to click on this, bring this up. This is where we're headed today with this drawing. I took a stab at kind of practicing it. The focus today is really on perspective. The photo that I have isn't great in terms of light and shadows, taken kind of more in the middle of the day where there's not a lot of definition in those buildings. But I really like the layout here. This is a place that's really special to me. I worked here for 4 summers while I was in college. I grew up very close to here, one of my favorite places on the planet. So shout out to Five Islands Lobster Company. So Jam, I saw your comment that you've been here when you were younger. So it's a great place. They take lobsters right out of the ocean right there. You cook them. Fantastic spot. So if you're all ready to go, we're just going to dig right into it. I'm working on this Hahnemuhle Skizze paper, which is it's about an 8.5 by 11 or so size. It's a European size, a little bit smaller than what I've been working on before. So it's going to be a fairly tight drawing. I do have a ruler for this one. I don't know if I'm going to use it. When I did this preparatory sketch, I didn't use the ruler. I was able to rotate and turn the drawing and get the angles that I need. But because I have this taped down, I'm going to see how it plays out. I try not to use a ruler as much as possible when working in perspective. I just find that it leads to a line that's a bit more mechanical and artificial than I like. Hand-drawn line just tends to carry a little bit more atmosphere and a little bit more life to the drawing. I'm going to be working in charcoal today. I've got my charcoal pencils. These are 4Bs. I've got a few of them, so I've got this one here that I'm going to be drawing with mostly, so it's kind of shaved down to expose the core, giving me a broader area to work with as well as a sharp point. I've got a sharp point on this one, and I've got my vine charcoal that I'll be working with, and my erasers, my kneaded and rubber erasers, as well as my trusty shading stump. So let's dig into it. If you're working in graphite, that's perfectly fine. I think it's going to translate really well to working in graphite. This isn't really about creating a depth and value. This is just the material that I prefer to be using. So I'm going to start by first just trying to lay down some basic proportions here. One of the things that I love about this building is that it's not square. And you can sometimes find yourself kind of battling something that, trying to make something square that really isn't or shouldn't be. And to me, it just lends a little bit of character to the drawing. So what I'm doing here is I'm just doing a quick gesture of the sketch, of the subject here, starting to think through some basic placement of things. If I look at the reference photo, one of the things that's really nice is that I inadvertently kind of placed this front corner of the main building here pretty much right in the center of the drawing. And I think that's going to serve as a nice anchor point for me. So if I take that initial line, this is pretty much the center of the drawing. And then from there, I can scale up, I can scale down to make everything fit as it needs to. And so if I start to establish some initial marks here, I'm not concerned with perfection at this point. I'm just trying to get marks on the page. So then I have something to react to. And I'm getting a sense for how do I feel about some of these lines, in particular on this side of the building where things are very kind of horizontal in nature. It's very easy to interpret an angle as sloping up when it's actually sloping down. So you can hardly hear. So I've got, let me turn up the volume. Thank you for calling that out. All right, is this sounding a little bit better? Cranking up the volume. I worry about it peaking too much. If you are having trouble though, just let me know. And also if you have any questions or any concerns throughout the event here, feel free to call them out in all caps. I'm going to be more likely to see them. and be able to respond to it more quickly. So all of these proportions are off right now, and that's fine. I think it's really healthy to spend a few moments at the beginning to just kind of practice this. I'm going to talk about vanishing points, orthogonals, things like that throughout this lecture, or not this lecture, throughout this demo. These are things that I've lectured about before, but I think it's really critical to understand the place that linear perspective has in the drawing process. If it's something that you've studied before, you've practiced before, say you bought a book on how to draw in perspective, there's a lot that happens in those books that can be really helpful, but we also want to make sure that we don't rely on it too heavily. One of the things that I tend to see happen in students is that they pick up a few kind of rules and kind of processes from a book and then use that as the foundation for the drawing, and we lose the gesture, we lose the kind of the life in the drawing, simply reacting to your subject. It can become kind of so mechanical that it can be kind of stifling. So what I'm trying to do here is I want to try to maintain some sort of freshness to the drawing. And I'm just starting to reacting to the angles that I'm seeing. And what I'm doing is I'm moving very quickly, moving my eyes back and forth between the photo and the drawing. And so as I look at the drawing off to my left, I'm trying to be aware of what's happening in my peripheral vision. And so I'm looking at the motion that this is making and seeing if it lines up with the angles of some of these buildings. And I'm seeing that I need to be really mindful of the horizon line. I'm going to bring that up a little bit. One of the things you can do as well is, I've got this paper, it's got a defined ridge along here. I use that as a guide to help with vertical edges. So I'm kind of locking these fingers in along there, and I'm trying to lock this hand, and I'm just kind of scoring it down, kind of transferring a vertical edge along there. And that can be sometimes helpful in some other lines and other marks as well. So just kind of a quick tip. And one of the things that's also really helpful is when you're looking at angles, it can let your marks overrun. You're trying to think about the angles and the paths rather than the distinct kind of start and stop point of each of those. And I'm trying to do that here as well. I'm thinking about vertical edges, diagonal lines, seeing how they intersect. And I want to look to see if this width here looks all right. And I feel like that, just judging by my eyes, it looks like it's all right. It's like it's a close to approximate width. One of the ways that I can check that is I want to kind of get a sense for how these two angles, these two corners line up. And I can look at that diagonal that runs across and see how that compares to the photograph. And I feel like I'm in pretty good shape there. So as you can see, the buildings are starting to just kind of take a rough skeletal shape. Again, it's not accurate. Mostly what I'm looking at is trying to understand, what's going to give me trouble, and is everything going to fit on the page? And this is all just soft vine charcoal that's going to kind of wipe away in a little bit. But again, these early passes are about just getting marks on the page. You can see in my initial kind of these faint lines, I drew that Lobster building a bit too low and perhaps a bit too small. I'm going to also be doing some editing in this drawing here. So I'm going to remove the figures, and I'm just going to try to close that door. I feel like that door is kind of problematic in terms of the perspective. So I'm going to envision that as being closed, and so that means I need to kind of project what is happening and where that corner is there. And one of the things that I was thinking about as I was doing my preparatory drawing is that I want to kind of use this as an opportunity to help me strengthen my skills of drawing when on location. So I'm imagining if I was set up here reacting to this set, you know, how would this turn out if I wasn't relying on the photograph to help me here? So that's part of what I'm thinking about here. So, okay, so I'm feeling a bit more confident now about this layout. Just some kind of rough lines here. I'm looking at that distant tree line here that looks east over towards Booth Bay. And Edgecombe area, edge of the wharf here. And this is cool. This is a town-owned wharf. Ends right here at the ocean. So you come down the road and there it just ends. And I remember at the end of the day we used to run right off and swim in the ocean. It's a cool place to be. All right. So yeah, again, I'm feeling like that's all right here. I can start to make things that are a bit more specific. Going to wipe this down. Trying to be, you know, a little bit more sensitive to that. I don't want to take it off completely because I do want to see my old marks there. I'm just going to check the chat here to see if there's any questions. All right, I think I missed a few. Judy's asking to do peonies and hydrangeas. I would love to do that. Let me see if I can find some. I do want to do a flower again soon, so I'll barely do it. So, and yeah, these marks are really light and loose at this point. We're going to be darkening it up as we go. These initial stages with the vine charcoal are really just trying to kind of wrap my head around this. Because what I want to avoid is a situation where I get to the finishing point too early, and I find out that it's not going to fit on the page. So this is compressed charcoal pencil. This is a 4B. And what I really want to be looking at are the horizontal lines. This reference photo is a bit tilted. I'm going to try to level this out here. And what I'm looking at are the roof lines here, and seeing how that bottom edge kind of angles up towards the horizon line off to the left, and the top one is slightly above eye level, and so it's angling slightly down. So the horizon line is somewhere right in along in here. And what I know about perspective is that with the horizon line, the parallel edges that are receding away from us will, if you extend them far enough, will converge at a common point off in the distance on that horizon line. And so that means if the horizon line is somewhere down here, this line here is just slightly above it. It's going to angle down just ever so slightly. I'm just using the side of my pencil right now because I want to keep these marks fairly light and loose. Allows me to fill in a large area. And you can see that I'm just overshooting those edges that I just drew because I want to avoid creating halos, and this is just an initial kind of stab at that. I can clean that back up as we go. If I become too precise at this stage, then what happens is I kind of spin my wheels. I burn so much energy trying to finish it as we go now, and it may not be correct. I may not have this angle correct, and I want to just be mindful that I want to be able to correct this as we go. So I'm trying to keep myself from becoming too precise at this stage. And utilizing the side of the pencil helps me to fill in a larger area kind of more quickly. So looking down, I'm finding that the peak of the house here, I'm using that as a guide to place this back door here. When I first started working there, I'd be right in there, I'd be serving ice cream out of that door. And we go up to the top of this building here, we make our onion rings. It's fantastic. So one of the things too, if you're having trouble with a straight line, really lock your wrist and really practice drawing with your arm. And that's really what I'm trying to do here. I'm using my pinky as a support, and I'm holding this quite a, really far back along the pencil. It keeps those marks light. And I'm just kind of scraping lightly across the page, again using this pinky as support, but really trying to use my whole arm to draw with. And this has got another kind of slight angle to it, kind of angling up this way. And you can do some angle sighting, so if you want to take your pencil, line it up, transfer it over to your drawing, that can be helpful. And I found that when sketching in particular, it's helpful to rely primarily on angle sighting rather than trying to find vanishing points, horizon lines, things like that, when in the drawing itself. Where perspective becomes really helpful is when you can build an intuitive sense of perspective. So to be able to visualize where that horizon line is, where generally where the vanishing points might lead to, but trying not to be too precise with it, because so many things in our world, they're close to precise but not quite there. And one of the things that's nice, I've got this table here, and the paper is generally oriented kind of parallel to that edge, so I can use this as a way to help create a guide for me. This becomes a support for me. And there's a slight angle upward. Now this building is kind of old and rickety, so it's not quite symmetrical, and that's where I really again want to react to my observations more than anything. Okay, so I'm just blocking in some of the shapes here. I know these doors aren't quite right at this stage. I'm looking at the awning here. And in general, the top of the awning is right horizontal. That's pretty much right in line with my eye level. So I'm kind of blocking that in. And that's going to be really helpful in terms of defining that space there. One of the things too that is really tricky about perspective is that we're constantly trying to battle our own understanding of objects and what's important. So what I mean by that is that our brain does a lot of fixing and figuring out without our real awareness. If we look at the side of this building, for example, our perspective allows us to kind of shear across the side of this building. We know that these windows are rectangles, but because of the angle that we're at, we're glancing across them, and they get shrunken into these thin slivers. But our brain, what's useful for our brain right now is to know that those are rectangular windows. And so in our minds, we interpret it as rectangles that are perhaps wider, more like this shape over here. And so there's a tendency to take these sections in the buildings and make them wider because we know in reality they are wide. That door, for example, is wide enough for a person to walk through, but from our perspective, we're looking across that opening, and it thins it down into this thin sliver. And so that's part of the big challenge that we deal with when working with perspective, is trusting the shapes that we're seeing as two-dimensional shapes. So hopefully that makes sense. The analogy I use is that of when drawing a cup, where one of the first things that people do when they draw a cup is go like this. They draw it like that, right? Round top, flat bottom. Optically, that's incorrect because we know that with a perspective where we can see the opening, we would have an oval here and we'd have an oval here. But there's a literal truth to this drawing in the sense that a cup has that. It has a round top and it has a flat bottom. And so that flat bottom, by drawing it this way, what that tells us is that our brains are prioritizing the flatness of that bottom over the roundness, that it has two qualities at the same time and is choosing one over the other. And so that's similar to what's happening with these windows, is that we know that they are, we know that they're kind of wider rectangles than we can actually see. And so I need to be able to trust the two-dimensional shapes that I'm seeing in front of me. I'm just going to kind of block in this window here too. And now what I'm looking at is these windows here, looking at the general angle of the roof line here. They're a little bit higher, and they come down above the awning. And again, these aren't correct, but hopefully if they're in the ballpark, now that I have something on the page, I can make very specific decisions about what needs to change in order for them to be correct. And I found that it's generally more helpful to assume that the marks are incorrect than assume that they are. Like this needs to come over quite a bit. Because now what I need to do is if I look at the peak back here, drop a plumb line down, I can see how that relates to the window. And you can see if I drop a line here, it's actually to the left of that window. If I do that over here, that means I need to shift this window way the heck over here. So now I've stepped it over 3 times. And in this case, now that I have it generally corrected, I can just kind of tap out some of those earlier ones to make sure that they don't confuse me as they go on. Come down here. Again, I have that kind of plumb line that drops down, and I know that the left side of this opening here is directly below this point. And then I can use the awning. Let's see, I can use this door here. Use this window as a guide to figure out how far over I need to make the back side of this open door. And I know that there's this rock that comes over here. Just going to lightly sketch that in so that I don't forget it. This window, or this flower box thing, kind of sticks out into the door. My initial attempt, I didn't quite get that. So now we're just kind of going through, we're gradually becoming more precise. I'm still utilizing the side of the pencil. Let's see. Bring that up. There's a post there. All right. I'm going to checking on here. Yeah, Linda, you're asking, you made a really good observation. These buildings are not quite square, and that's something that I made note of in the preparatory sketch to bring up, so I'm glad that you did that. So if these two buildings were perfectly parallel with one another, they would share vanishing points. And I chose this subject actually in part because I like the fact that they're skewed. You know, this is on one angle, this turns a bit, and they have their own set of vanishing points. So if I take my eraser, my straight edge here, what I'm looking for, actually I need to scooch this over a little bit so you can see it here. If I extend this line up here, the horizon line is somewhere around here. I can kind of pivot on that horizon line to the bottom edge of the building, and this roof line here lead to that same vanishing point. If we carry this up, we see that it generally aligns with that roof. You know, it's got a bit of a sag in it because it's an old building, but it's got its own vanishing point. Now, this building, because it's turned, has a vanishing point that's farther off to the left. And so if we were to carry that across here, we can see that it's got these lines, if we extend them far enough, would converge at a different vanishing point because they're not parallel with one another. So working with vanishing points is all about understanding parallel systems. This building is generally one parallel system where all of these lines, the roof lines, the floor line, on this side, everything leading away from us, they're parallel, so they're going to share a vanishing point. These lines here are not parallel with this building, but they're parallel with each other, so they're going to have their own set of vanishing points. All right, just go straight for the lobster. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So I haven't drawn with the ruler, and I'm going to only pull it out if I really need it. Again, when I did the initial sketch, I found myself being able to rotate the drawing quite a bit, and that was helpful. Just because my hand-eye coordination is not quite as accurate as I'd like it to be. So now with these lines that are kind of overshot, I can start to erase them down. And then this as well, this step of erasing also helps to refine that form. So I'm trying to think back and forth, look back and forth between the drawing and the reference and make adjustments to that perspective if I need to. So I'm going to do that here as well. And think in general, I feel like these lines are working out all right. All right, just kind of clean up some of those just so I feel a bit more confident in the shapes there. I think what I'd like to do is actually lay down some charcoal back in here. So just utilizing the side of my pencil, kind of rolling over the little eraser residue there. Just laying down some charcoal, keeping it light, and wipe this down a little bit actually. I'm not worried about any charcoal being picked up here. In fact, I wonder if it's going to be helpful to do that, just to provide some value in the sky. So those of you who were drawing with me on Friday, working on the chicken, we had some technical issues with the camera. It seems to be worked out today, I hope. But we'll see. That's kind of the nature of live events, right? Is that things can go wrong, and they will. We're in episode 25, I believe, already, of this whole series. So if you are new, we are with Artist Network, and we've started up this Drawing Together series, just kind of keeping our skills sharp, working with these live drawing events. And what I want to do is right now I'm just kind of getting that background kind of blocked in so that it doesn't become a problem later on. Now as I drop in that background, it's going to be easier to then place the building right on top of that. And I think I'm just going to let that stay fairly loose. I don't think I need to be super precise with the that tree line. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to hold in my mind that general path of those trees, and I'm just creating them as a series of these shorter vertical marks rather than drawing a line. And that's going to create a stronger sense of atmosphere and push those back. If I draw a line back there, I run the risk of it being too strong and popping off the page. All right. OBB is asking what size paper. This is about an 8.5 by 11. This is a Hahnemuhle paper that is European sized, and it is so it's like 8.3 centimeters. Wait, what is it? I'll just pull that up. It's about 8.5 by 11 or so. It's this right here. I don't know what dimensions that are. They are. Yeah, 8.3 by 11.7 inches. So 21 by 29.7 centimeters. That's what I'm working on this one. And I just chose that because I really like this paper for this. It allows for precision, but it also lifts the charcoal pretty well. So, and as I mentioned at the start of this drawing, this photo isn't the most ideal in terms of its light and shadow. So I'm going to make some editorial decisions to make this a stronger drawing, hopefully. And so it's not necessarily about replicating the photograph itself. I don't want this to feel like a photograph. I'm using this as a reference for the drawing. I want the drawing to be the primary thing. And so I can make some editorial decisions about how dark to make something, how light to make it. All right, let's see. So I think now I can essentially start to build it in layers where I can start to finish that background. I'm utilizing the side of this pencil, and it's kind of often underutilized. I feel like in drawing is, you know, we tend to rely on this kind of tripod grip, like the way we write, and we kind of forget about the side of the pencil. And you can get so much out of that by just tilting it on the side, because as a cylinder, when I'm scraping across a page, it only makes contact at a specific point. And so I can create a fairly fine line with that. All right, let's see, what do I want to do here? I've got this white rain gutter in the trim up there that I think I want to kind of establish. So I'm just going to use my rubber eraser, sharpen up that edge. Now I'm overstating that the size of the gutter in the trim. Then I'm going to cut back into it. So there, that was a bit too heavy. So I'm going to go back in and kind of redefine that edge. All right, so here is where, again, I can use the side of the pencil, and underneath that gutter there's this nice shadow. And I'm just kind of taking multiple stabs at this. I'm just kind of taking it in chunks, laying down a line, but I don't want to be too heavy with it. I'm going to bring these marks down vertically. To indicate that shadow. Again, just utilizing the side of the pencil. I think what I need to do is actually kind of smudge this out. I think I can kind of refine that a little bit more. Heather, you've been there, huh? Yeah, it's a kind of great little spot. I see that they're open now for the season. They're just open seasonally. It's one of the great places for lobster in the state of Maine. My favorite place, at least. All right. Just kind of smudging that out. I want to do that here with this as well. And I really want to be careful with my interpretation of line in this drawing. You can see that I'm really trying to be gentle with it. I don't want to overstate the line work in this drawing, because that can ultimately end up flattening out the drawing. You know, the line can be really helpful in some areas, but when used improperly, can be it can kind of work against us. So actually, what I think I want to do now is I'm actually going to create a bit of a gradient here, darken that water near the base, so I can create this alternating sequence of light and dark. So now the wharf here, the end of it, can be light against the slightly darker water. So that's a bit artificial when looking at the photograph. So that's an editorial decision that I'm making to help kind of break up that space a little bit. So And I'm finding that, you know, like my instinct right now is to turn the paper. I can't quite get around to get some of those, some of the angles that I need. All right, I think, but now what I'll do is I've got this front corner feeling like it's pretty well locked in. What I want to do is I want to start to react to the basic shapes of light and dark. So again, this is another instance where we have a door opening right in here, but we're kind of shearing across it. Our perspective is such that we're glancing across that shape. We're not seeing directly into it, so I just see these thin slivers of light and dark. And this is where it's really helpful to try to perceive these in terms of just abstract shapes. So I think I need to make that a little bit shorter. I'm just trying to look for the shapes of the light and dark and thinking about it in that terms rather than think I'm drawing trash cans or I'm drawing a door. Just trying to react to those shapes. Using that to smudge out. And then what I'm seeing is that the left side of this door, that edge, is about right in the middle laterally between the front and the back edges. And then, you know, with some of these detail areas, I'm not worried about being super precise with that window in the door. That's too big, for example. So I want to just kind of suggest that. So what's really most critical, and you see a lot of urban sketchers do this, is that if you get the major structure in, then it becomes a bit more forgiving as you go along, adding those details. So for this window, for example, you know, just representing that as a kind of a thinner kind of sliver of dark, you know, is effective. You don't necessarily need to get in there and render it completely. And I can go back into it and say, well, it's too abstract, so maybe I'll make it more kind of defined, or you know, I can leave it as it is. And I think this is kind of important to have that drain spout come out there. So you can see I overcut it. I made that drain spout too strong. And I kind of like that there's not a heavy edge along there, right along in this edge. So I'm just going to leave that for now. I may come back to it. If anything, maybe kind of darken it along here. I think there's a tendency, especially with buildings, to want to overstate things, make them more explicit than they really need to be. Again, if you get the major structure right, it can be forgiving. And you see some great artists, somebody like, you know, Van Gogh, for example, would intentionally let perspective and correct proportions become less important in the work. You know, valuing kind of the emotional and the kind of the dynamic qualities of line and proportion and color to play a stronger role. So you want to ask that of yourself, like how important is precision to you? And then take it to whatever level you feel most comfortable. But you see some amazing artists that can really kind of twist and distort space and create things that are just packed with emotion and drama. And I do feel like it is helpful as you learn these tools to try to master them and just be conscious of when you're abandoning them. So I just use my eraser to kind of sharpen up that edge, and then I can kind of wash over it with the charcoal to drop the value down a little bit. And I'm just going to keep going with that. Let's see. I think I need to darken this. There we go. Okay, just moving through, adding some detail. That initial pass at the door that I had here had it too big. Just going to let that sit for a bit. And now this door is really kind of thin, really narrow. And so I want my drawing to reflect that. Now what I'm thinking about in this opening is about the shape of the light. So some of that light is coming through. So rather than drawing the line down that side of the door, I'm just actually going to do it it's a more light negative drawing than anything, where I'm drawing that dark shape in there. And then maybe I can I complete it with the shading stump right in there. And if that edge is too soft, what you can do, use your rubber eraser to kind of clean up that edge. Because I can't quite get a view of that edge, I'm going to switch to my left hand. And that kind of sharpens it up, and again I can now wash over it with my charcoal to drop the value back down again so it's not too bright. Hopefully that makes sense in terms of a process there. We got a little bowl for a dog, it looks like here. Looking up at the screen right now to kind of double check proportions and perspective. So because I'm so close to it, and because this isn't, I'm not looking down at it directly, I'm not squared up on it, over it, I need to be really mindful that I'm kind of calibrating to that perspective. So my eyes are adjusting to the perspective on the drawing board here, and trying to correct that. So I need to be able to look at it from a distance. So if you're able to set your drawing up and look at it, say, from across the room, then double check the proportions and see what stands out for you in terms of those proportions. All right, so I think I need to do the same thing here, kind of sharpen up the edges using the eraser. Now in this case, what I think I want to do is actually darken the building on this side. I'm going to make this a little bit darker than it actually is in the drawing. And you see I just lost that awning. So I'm just darkening that in. And that awning is going to be darker on top of that. And then the rest of the building there's going to be light up here and some light down in here where as we clear the awning. So I haven't found the need to use my straight edge at this point. I feel like the proportions are working out all right, and I'm liking the lines. If you're utilizing a straight edge, if you're following along, that's all right. There's no right or wrong there. I've always gotten that question from students. Is it cheating to use a ruler? There's no such thing as cheating. There's just what serves your drawing and what doesn't. But I think what you want to be careful of is just assuming that using a straight edge is going to serve the drawing. You may not necessarily want that. I'm concerned about the straight edge becoming too mechanical, too rigid in this drawing, especially in a space like this that by its nature is irregular. It's got some age to it, and I think hand-drawn lines are going to convey that a bit more effectively than using a straight edge. But that's my concept for the artwork here, and it may not be yours. So, All right, so kind of moving across. I'm feeling pretty confident on that. Now, if I want to later, I can go back in and add more specificity to that. I can make it more detailed if I need to. Just want to get that shadow in. So this shadow is being cast. There's a bait shed right over here off to the left. That's where all the bait is. So then when the men come down, they load up the traps, load up the boats, head out, come back, unload the lobster. Okay. What I'm doing right now is just kind of clearing my mind a little bit. So I'm moving into areas that are a little less involved in terms of the thinking. And then now I'm going to dig into this main building here. Now this building, luckily, has this kind of dark trim kind of in there. So having a line there, it becomes really helpful. And now I need to envision where that edge is. If it didn't have that white trim, I would need to figure out how to manage that edge. Sharpen that up a bit. So again, I'm still trying to use the side of my pencil as much as possible. I'm building this the rain gutter by establishing the shadow underneath it. And then this part here is in shadow. And there's a white kind of trim here that's really catching the light. So I can sharpen that back up. And now I'm going to shade in here. I'm going to just darken that roof. And then what I can do actually is, I'm trying not to be super precise with that. I can use my eraser to sharpen that up. Again, I don't feel like I need the straight edge at this point. But if I overshoot it like this, if I draw that roof line, and I'm not precise with that edge, I've always got my eraser to clean that up. And I just love that, an edge like that. Rather than drawing that line, I'm creating the edge using the eraser, and that creates that sharp edge. And that works out all right. And now I can kind of create that sagging roof line here. It's a bit of a halo. I can just kind of soften that. So drawing in perspective is really a lot about managing edges. We talk about that a lot in this series, from still lives to portrait work to perspective. So much of drawing is about managing edges and how we want to deal with that. Because as if you've been with me for the series, you'll have heard me say that that lines. Oh, I don't have an answer for that. Suri just picked up on that. Lines don't exist in nature. They're abstractions. And so we want to be really careful with how we utilize them. And there's a lot of potential in using a line to create expression, and they're really kind of seductive things that we can work with. But you want to be mindful of them. Our instinct is often just to go straight to drawing a line, and we kind of lose the overall sense of an edge. All right. So I'm getting some comments about some of the lines here. If you see anything that's off, let me know. I feel like that's perhaps a bit too bold there. Let that go. All right. Yeah, this feels a bit high to me. So I may have raised this roof too much. And what I'm looking at is the that negative space between the two buildings. This space right in here is a bit off. So I think what I'm going to do though is leave it as it is. I don't. What are we? Yeah, we're about 45 minutes in already, so I want to get this thing moving, and I think it'll have an impact in the drawing, but I need to ask myself how much of that is that. So that was just utilizing the side of my pencil. Just to kind of create that wash down there. And then what I find by doing that is utilizing the side of the pencil is that it reads more like a thin shape than a line. And it can be very subtle sometimes, but our eyes perceive that. And we interpret things differently when we perceive it as a shape versus a line. And then we got all these cables so that when we look at that corner, there's no real distinct edge to that corner. It's very difficult to see because of the piping that runs down there, and then the way the light's striking it. So maybe what I need to do is this. So here we go. So as I'm drawing this vertical line, I'm really letting my hands just lock, and I'm just using arm movement to create that. And then I think I need to sharpen this edge up a little bit. There we go. Okay. I'm going to wash over this, give it a little bit of value. And now I can start to drop some of these in. Again, I'm just going to be suggesting these windows because there's these thin slivers. Drop this down. Yeah, so this is, I'm starting to feel this space here is being off. And just looking at this, I feel like the overlap of the building. So I either needed to bring this building up more or this top down. But again, I'm just gonna let it be for now, so that we move the drawing along farther. Otherwise, it would set me back. They're half hour or so, and at that point, you guys might just be sick of me. So we'll we'll just move this thing along. All right. So now I've got the awning that I'm gonna be laying in here. And now really take some time to evaluate the angles of the awning here, the top and the bottom edge. So if we look at this, we make this horizon straight, you can see this bottom edge angles up slightly towards the horizon line. So it's leading to that vanishing point that we looked at earlier. This is, again, just slightly below eye level, so it's angling up as well. And this is where perspective can be kind of particularly challenging for us. There are things that as they recede away, we have a natural tendency to feel like they go up in a way, but when in fact they actually are angling downward. And that happens very often with students at the very beginning. When we start working with perspective, we go out to a hallway and the ceiling lines are receding away from us. They feel like they're going up when in fact they're coming down at quite a severe angle. And that's our brain just making some editorial decisions and skewing how we perceive things. All right, so you can see I haven't gone very dark with that. There's a slight shift in value here on that front with that triangle, so I'm looking at keeping these edges generally parallel. And it's a little bit darker up along this edge here, letting it fade down a little bit, and then get really dark right in under here. What I'm trying to do is hold in my mind the angle of that light as it cuts across the building. And then rather than draw that line, I'm trying to visualize it and stop my marks right on that line. You can see what that does to, that awning is really critical in terms of creating that space. It's really helpful. So one of the things that is helpful too when you're out on location is to look for elements that help to reinforce the perspective, what's going to be useful in the drawing. Something like that becomes really helpful. It's a nice high contrast area with clear edges, and then it helps to define that space nicely. And then there's a shadow being cast onto that building behind here, and that's from a set of steps that go up the back. So I'm actually going to darken that a little bit. Not as dark as that shadow there. And you can see too that I haven't worked at all with any of the siding of the buildings. And I need to ask myself as we move along in the drawing how critical it is, or how important it would be to actually draw any of the siding, the lines in the siding. So this is just my shading stump, starting to establish some perspective there. Okay, oh, somebody asked a question about eye level. So eye level is really there, when we all kind of have a general kind of intuition about our eye level. If we're standing on the ground, we're looking as kind of parallel to the surface plane of the earth as possible. That's really what eye level is. And we all kind of have a natural kind of intuition about that, what feels generally level. So that's what we're looking at, is that when I took this photo, I was up on a hill, we're looking down towards the building, and that puts our eye level right up around in here. That's where the horizon line is. All right, so now I'm going to suggest, I'm going to actually use the sharper edge here. There's a lot going on. I'm going to suggest the door. I'm going to keep these marks fairly light. And then when it crosses into the shadow, I can bear down a little bit more and see if does that pick up a little bit of transparency. I don't know if that's showing very much. So if I lift off here, perhaps that becomes a bit more visible. And that helps that to read as a shadow. So what I'm doing here is I'm building these objects that are on this side of the building by utilizing just the shapes of the shadow. Wash that over, knock down that value a little bit. Again, I made that editorial decision to close that door to help reinforce that perspective. So if I hold the vanishing point is somewhere right around over here. As we move across, we're just kind of adding some more kind of specificity to that building. So I'm utilizing the side of the pencil quite a bit, and you can see what an effective job it does at making a sharp edge. You don't need the point to make a sharp edge all the time. Sometimes you do, and so I try to be really kind of sparing with the use of the point. All right, and I need to float around. I found myself getting a little anxious down in there, and so I need to kind of loosen up a little bit, stretch out. Does the side of the paper make it, Pranya is asking, does the side of the paper make a difference in perspective drawing? I'm not quite sure I understand the question. Are you talking about the size? I wonder if that's a mistype. But in general, yeah, when you're working, I notice when filming, so my main job with Artist Network is as a producer of the instructional videos. And when we are setting up artists to work with, one of the things we learned is that it's important to show the edges of the paper in the shot, especially if we can't get directly on top of it. when we see the edges of the paper, it helps us to put the drawing in perspective and we start to make adjustments to it. Otherwise, what happens is that, without the context of the edge of the paper, we interpret whatever's on the page differently. So I think being able to see everything is really kind of important. The edges of the paper do play a role in that because we start to adjust the shapes of the objects, relative to the dimensionality of the paper, the dimensions of the paper. The size of it in general, though, is really, really up to you. Smaller drawings just tend to be a bit more intimate. Larger drawings become a bit more bold, and we kind of interact with them on a more kind of human level, if that makes sense. But there's no kind of real rule about what size to make it. Just what works for you. Just know that the smaller you work, the less tolerance there is if the proportions or the perspective is off. So you can be on a small drawing like this. If I'm off by 1/8 of an inch, it could have a huge impact on how we interpret the space of the drawing. If I'm off by 1/8 of an inch on a large drawing, you may not notice at all because proportionally it's it's very different, even though it's off by the same physical amount. So you can see here that that size is way too big. Again, I'm just going to let it go for now. Right, I think what I want to do is maybe leave the face of this largely light in value. Just kind of a light wash with the charcoal, darkening the sky a little bit. That'll help to pop that edge out. So just utilizing the side of the charcoal pencil, keeping the touch really light. It's just the weight of the charcoal on the paper. Kind of building it up, smudging it down, and wiping it down like that. Mary is asking, how do you download the image? So if you go to it, you should be able to bring it up. Downloading it from the, I guess it depends on what browser you're on right now in terms of being able to download the image. You should be able to if you pull up the image and you right-click and then save it to your desktop. That might be an effective way to then print. Again, I'm not quite sure the best way to advise you on downloading. All right. Just use that eraser to kind of sharpen that edge and create that light edge against the slightly darker sky. So I just used the whole side of the eraser to do that. And that helps to create a stronger edge. And now utilizing the side of this pencil as much as possible, kind of darkening in that stretch there. And then there is this vent thing here. I'm going to suggest with this, I'm not going to overstate it. So just using the shading stump to do that, and then I can bring in a line in just a few kind of key areas. But that's really helpful to have some sort of contrast there, to have something back there that's dark against that light ridge. So if you're joining late, one of the things I talked about earlier is that just using the side of the drawing board. I have my pinky kind of aligned with the side of the board, and I'm locking my wrist, locking the pencil, and just running down the side of the board there. And then what that does is it creates an edge that's nice and parallel with the paper. If you just have a regular drawing pad, you can do that as well. Just be careful of paper cuts. I've gotten many of those. So. And then I'm just kind of working on that whatever this thing is. Good. Okay. How's everybody doing? Hello, Robert Davidson. Hello from Maine. I hope that everybody in Maine is doing okay. Just reading how the numbers are increasing there, so I hope that doesn't affect tourism too much. All right. So now what I want to do is kind of work my way down. I have the general placement of the forms. And so again, this is, I'm thinking largely about trying to build skills for when I'm on location drawing, how I might draw in preparation for a painting, for example, as I'm doing a sketch. When I'm painting, I don't draw on the canvas, but I might bring a sketchbook and to kind of work out the basic composition, try to think through the perspective, try to visualize some of the more challenging areas so I can understand the forms a little bit more. And so this is very much how I would draw when on location if I had just a small sketchbook as well. So, and again, a lot of it is just kind of reacting to forms, not relying too much on the use of vanishing points, use of orthogonal lines. If you haven't heard that term orthogonals, what the orthogonals are, they're the lines that are receding away from us, that are parallel. So the bottom edge of the building, the roof line, this roof line here, those are all orthogonals, those ones that extend to that vanishing point. So I'm not trying to be too kind of beholden to them. Again, I'm trying to react to what's in front of me, because those reactions can tell as much about the buildings as it does about the artists who made them. So sometimes it's really interesting to see drawings that are incorrect because it says something about the artist. Like I said with Van Gogh, it said something about him when the perspective or the proportions were off a bit. And then that tolerance of how far off is something, again, that's is some sort of indicator about the artist. Doing some negative drawing here, just drawing the dark parts of the windows, these window panes. And then maybe let's see, I'm going to make that a little bit wider, and then I think I'm going to drop a shadow underneath. All right. Kind of clean up some of these areas if they're too messy. Checking it out from a distance. We're getting there, we're getting close. I think as before I go down there, I found myself kind of tightening up. And I'm just going to move around the drawing to move to a different spot. Just adding a little bit more contrast there, hopefully to pull that building forward, separate it from that background. And I feel like this needs to be defined a little bit more too, this front edge. I'm trying not to draw a line as much, so maybe what I need to do is actually lighten this up, give it a lighter edge. Let's see how that works. That helps to pull that forward a little bit. Again, this is where there's a lot of editorial decisions being made because it's not an ideal photo for a photo itself. It's got a lot of information about the space, but I think if I were out there trying to make a good photograph, I would have waited for, later in the day, perhaps, or maybe early in the morning. But I'm going to use what I have here. And I think I need to actually darken this back in here. Let's give it some value. I can kind of suggest some of the waves a little bit by just kind of using my shading stump, letting them kind of trail off into the distance. Trying to be selective with that. Maybe darken this. I don't really know what's going on with that shape there, so I'm just going to kind of make an abstract decision to darken that, just so I can create some additional contrast to help pop that forward and kind of balance out. I've got this dark shape over here, so I just made that up. got rid of the figures there. Looked at that general shape. There's the edge of the wharf where the town road ends and the wharf begins. And I think I just want to treat the rest of the landscape fairly loosely, and that'll help to create some selective focus, hopefully. Now, let me see here. So trying to just be mindful that I don't have to render every detail here. All right, so this, what I'm using, this is largely horizontal, the sign up here. So I'm using my wrist, my wrist is resting on the easel here. I'm going to use that as to help. So I'm just I'm really paying most attention to what my wrist is doing right now as it moves across that board. Locking my wrist, locking my fingers there. Utilizing the side of the pencil. I'm going to make this line a little bit heavier to account for that shadow. And I think maybe soften that up a little bit. I think I want to sharpen this edge, so I'm going to use the broad side of the eraser. And I'm going to come back to the lettering on there in a little bit. We'll talk about handling that and how my mindset around that. Yeah, so I see the comment about the mechanical pencil. I think that's definitely true. So with a sharper, harder material like graphite or lead, you're going to definitely get a harder line. This, if I were out on the field sketching, though, again, this is kind of practicing for that. If I were out on the field sketching, I would probably be using charcoal, and I don't want to get bogged down by the details. And so the main goal is to try to get that perspective kind of locked down, and then you as an artist, if you're following along, you can decide for yourself how far you want to take those details. So and what is comfortable for you. So using that mechanical pencil, like you're saying, I think is a really helpful way to get some of those details, because you get such a fine line. Just kind of blocking in that door. And you can see I just kind of overshot that edge, because then I can use my eraser to define that edge a bit more and create that form without utilizing line work, really. Switch to that sharper edge. Now there's a dark edge right in along in here. And so just like I did with the doors back in here, where I'm looking at the shape of the light and the shadow, I can be doing that as well. So rather than over-rendering, I'm just going to be looking at that shape. So there's this kind of dark form in here. Just utilizing the side of the pencil, that's going to keep that point sharp. I think what I'm going to do actually is kind of sneak up on the value. So rather than go right for the dark darks, I'm just going to wash this in as a value. Smooth it out, and now come back in with another pass of the darker dark, and that allows me to do some negative drawing to get that window established right in here. There's a bit of an angle. And so you want to be careful too about, where you add the detail. So, if your objective is to get, detail everywhere, you go for it, right? If you're looking for more selective focus, then just be mindful of where that focus is, where that detail is added, because if you put the detail, say, on the interior and then the exterior of the building is incorrect, it may actually make the interior of the building kind of fall apart. Sometimes it just takes a simple line to define the edge of a building, and that's all you need. And so you just want to kind of look at that and really kind of figure out ultimately what is most essential in terms of adding that detail. And then there's a bit of a line here. Gonna make the editorial decision to get rid of the customer in there. She's moved on and I was waiting for a lobster. And I'm just going to suggest some of the forms in there because I don't want that to pop forward. I want that to hold in the space there. Perspective is a lot of fun as you become more comfortable with it. And I think for me, again, having taught it for many years, I think the thing that I find most valuable for students is to try to build an intuitive understanding of it, so that you can then, be able to kind of sketch freely without having to, stop and find the vanishing point, find the horizon lines, things like that. And so I think it's helpful to practice and know where those are, but there's a lot of freedom that comes about when you kind of intuitively know something is wrong with the perspective and then what to do to fix it. Oftentimes perspective is better as a tool to help reel you in if you've lost a perspective, if it's not doing what you want it to. Rather than building it entirely from the use of horizon line and vanishing points, if that makes sense. All right, so now what I want to do is kind of deal with the text, and oftentimes you'll find that it's most effective to not overstate the text on a building because that can really pop to the surface. I want to make sure that this stays on that plane of the face of the building there. So what I'm looking at are some general marks, and I'm not thinking about the actual letters as much as possible. I'm just trying to react to some of the darker marks that I'm seeing in the photograph. If I let my eyes lose focus, it helps me to kind of see that a bit more clearly. And that scale is a little bit off, but that's all right. I think what I did is I think I made that sign too large, and that affected the spacing and the placement of that text. And that's that. Now, really in the back end, remember how I am incorrect in this spot here. This is shorter than what I've drawn here. I've made this too tall, and then by extension I pulled everything up because I was looking at placing that in the negative space, feeling confident in the windows and the door, and I placed that properly, but then I lost the scale of that sign. So that's something to be mindful of as well, is that being off in one area, it's all an interconnected network of proportions, and with one thing affecting the other. And so, I mean, as a whole, though, I feel like the space holds up. It captures the general essence of the place. And if I were on location drawing this, I'd feel pretty confident in saying that, all right, now I understand this space well enough to go in and now perhaps paint it, or call it a day and say this drawing is good enough. One of the things that I love about drawing is that it really anchors in your memory that event of being there. I heard in interviewing many urban sketchers, they talk about that same effect, is by slowing things down, slowing your observations, and taking the time to really just look at what's in front of you and then render it on the page. It makes that experience a bit more concrete in your mind. Looking at the drawing then later, or the painting later, it can bring back all those memories, similar to the way a smell can take you back to like your grandmother's house, 40 years later. The looking at marks like this, it does tend to anchor the that experience in the mind in a really powerful way. And so I'm excited after this to get out and to kind of draw on location. I mean, I wish I could get out to Maine. I'm out in Colorado, so I can't zip down to 5 islands like I'd love to, but there are places around me that'll work just as well. So hopefully that makes sense here. Let me see. I just want to check check the questions here. I have a question about the charcoal pencil. This happens to be a General's charcoal pencil. This is a 4B, and it works really well for me. I don't really know enough about the various brands to say I prefer one brand over the other, but this seems to be working out really well for me. The 4B is a nice material that gets a fair amount of depth in the values, while also maintaining a certain amount of control. So I don't know as if I'd necessarily need to go any darker. So this is really just kind of sketching and gestural drawing just to kind of build some form there. I'm looking at it from a distance to see if it captures the space in an effective way. Adding some value here. I didn't do the flowers here. I think I just want to suggest them as well. So looking at the general form, utilizing the side of the pencil, just kind of a quick gesture of that to try to fill that space in. Maybe I can add that suggestion of the power box there. And I don't think I want to do any of the siding that's running this way. As I look at the building, that's not really a critical thing, and I worry about it overwhelming the drawing. As I start to add lines in there. So I guess I can give it a shot, see what happens. I'm just trying to be really light and suggest some texture, and I guess that's all right. maybe suggesting some of that texture is helpful. But I want to be really careful to not overstate the lines there. So I was just using the shading stump, and it's got these kind of ridges built into it already that are effective in suggesting that. And I think actually what I want to do is bring this up a little bit more to front and lock that dark shape back there. But I think that's about it for today. I'll hang on for a few more minutes to see if there's any lingering questions. We are, again, Artist Network here. We put together a bunch of resources on artistnetwork.com. So if you go to the main page, find Drawing Together, you'll find all the show pages. People have been sharing the work that you all have been doing. You can go to each page, share your drawing from that episode. We meet every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern. The next drawing I'm going to be working on is a heron just down the street, and there's some ponds over here that there's a heron had just jumped into the water, caught a fish, and jumped back out, and he was all cool and spiky. So I took that photo quick, and I'm going to be working on that on Wednesday. There's some cool old gnarled trees in the area too, so I'm going to be doing one of those on Friday. And if this video goes up as a recording after the live event, so you can always go back and watch it if you want to see how it all came together. If you're joining us late, you can always watch the videos and the playbacks of it. Go to the show notes, the description of the video, and you'll find the reference photo if you'd like to do your own drawing. There are additional resources at artistnetwork.com. On the Drawing Together page, I put together a list of some helpful drawing resources, but I think the biggest thing for me is that we've been able to form a nice community here of artists who like to draw and are utilizing this time to help improve drawing skills, sharpen them up, meeting people from all over the world. I just need to sharpen that edge just a little bit. All right, I feel like that works out all right. Captures the light in an effective way, but again, this isn't really about the light as much as it is about trying to get that perspective, seeing that the changing perspective between the two buildings are not in alignment with one another, so they have different vanishing points. Doing kind of a quick study, a quick sketch of it. Again, if I wanted to keep working on this, you could put another couple hours and just focus on the details, but now that I have the main structure in here, it's allowing me to be able to dig in and I could get in there and add the details and not worry about the overall perspective as much. Again, I made some errors in here in terms of the proportions. I chose to keep them so that we could move the drawing along, but you want to decide for yourself what that tolerance looks like, what you want to correct. I think if time wasn't running out, I'd really want to go back in and correct it. It's bothering me, but I feel like you all have been with me long enough and you've seen the general process to know where I'm going with it. And I don't think it's going to necessarily add a whole lot to your experience to watch me do that. So I'm just going to call it good as it is. So thank you so much for joining me. I want to run back through, see if there's any other questions. Janice is asking, I'd like to use your reference photo not only for a sketch, but for painting as well. That is perfectly okay. There are sites online where you can find lots of reference images. I got most of the photos that we're utilizing in this series are ones that I've taken, but there are two that I got from a site called Pixabay. You might check that out as well. I am glad everybody seems to be enjoying it. Mary, yes, love doing trees. Looking forward to that. I am very much looking forward to that as well. We finally get some green on the trees there, so... All right, no technical issues today. It makes me really happy. At least I haven't seen too many of them. We had 2 in a row where we had some technical glitches, but we seem to be doing okay for that. Heather, yeah, I'm glad to hear that your perspective is feeling good. And just practice it. If you're getting really frustrated with perspective, it's really just a matter of practice and in applying it. For some people it clicks, others it doesn't, but it's, again, one of the things I mentioned early on in perspective is that we are constantly battling our own minds in terms of interpreting space and what's important in that space and what's important for us to know about that space. And oftentimes the least critical thing for our minds to internalize is the perspective. If we want to correct things, like when we look down a hallway, it's important for us to know that those walls are parallel, that the ceiling and the floor are parallel, not that they actually converge at a vanishing point. So we really are working against our instincts, and it's not a matter of being able to get it or not. It's really just a matter of practice, and some minds are just require a little bit more effort to kind of override the thinking a bit. It's a lot of what I tell students is that when we're drawing, we're actually trying to shut down our brains more because our thought process can override our ability to understand the optical truth of the situation in front of us. So just kind of keep that in mind. If you are getting frustrated, give it time, continue to practice. It's just a lot of fun. Do it because you love it, and go from there. Barb, I'm glad it felt like you were back in Maine. Me too. I did leave out a few details here. So if you look in the photo, there's some of the power lines that cut through the sky that I just chose to ignore. It's one of those things too that pay attention to what you do ignore in a space. Sometimes something can be right in front of you, but we look past it, and that says so much about the experience itself. So if your objective is to capture the experience of being on location somewhere, what you leave out is just as important as what you put in. And you don't have to put everything in there, because it's kind of like when you're driving, we're looking beyond the windscreen. We're looking through the glass. The glass is there, but we don't often put our awareness on that. And so it's only when there's a big crack or a big bug hits the windshield that all of a sudden our awareness of that windscreen becomes more apparent. And so again, just kind of keep that in mind, and you as the artist, you make that editorial decision and decide what is serving the experience and what is serving the drawing there, and what your tolerance is for that. Does it have to be 100% accurate? If it does, do it. If it doesn't, don't worry about it. So, all right, I think that, yeah, it's Five Islands Lobster Company. Check it out. It's just south of Bath on Georgetown Island there. So thank you so much. Hopefully the folks at Five Islands are watching. I shared the drawing with them, and so we'll see how it goes. So again, thank you so much. I'm going to sign off now. I'm going to see you all on Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern. We're going to have a blast. So thank you all for joining.